Getting a good strong signal here.
Yeah.
The sound's really moving through the tubes today.
Hey, you ever heard the one about the Slavic Aryans?
The Slavic Aryans? Never heard it.
They took a look at the Jewish calendar and said, all right, chlopzi, double or nothing.
Hacha!
Because, that's right, we're getting a new calendar.
It's a big, long calendar, right?
We need a bigger and better calendar.
Welcome back to The Empire Never Ended with Boris, Fritz, and Rey.
Yo.
Hey. Wish I could tell you the date today, or even the year, but this is a new calendar system for me.
God, I have to look. It's somewhere in my notes here. I think we're at 11,020 something.
Oh, nice.
I'm not sure if it's 11,023. I tried to do the calculations based on another date that I saw in a RUNVira text.
Okay.
And then tried to figure it out based on that, but I'm not actually sure. But,
just use a pyramid inch, dude. Tried and true.
This is, I don't know, what, our sixth calendar or something. And this one's significantly longer than I think most of the other ones, no? I mean, your fame is like 100 something.
What happened 11,000 years ago?
We'll get there. 11,000 years ago is when the Slavic Aryans originated in the Neolithic period.
Gotcha. Is that what we're talking about today?
Are they Hyperborean?
Ooh, good question.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
Some are.
At least Lemurian, right?
Some are.
Actually, no, I haven't seen that much
Czechs
Lemurian.
Hyperborean?
Czechs, I didn't go into the Czechs. I did mostly Ukrainian and Russian today.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess that's a little taste of what's to come. And I guess we're departing a little bit from the more serious readings of Ginon and Evola and the geopolitics of the Intermarium. But I guess with a little touch of all of these things.
Hey.
And maybe a little bit of context behind some of the post-Soviet black metal that Azov ideologue Olena Semeniaka loves so much and thinks is such a powerful force against modernity.
But don't we all, though? Don't we all?
Yeah.
It's truly the voice of the people, of the ancient ones.
Of the ancient ones, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is, let's consider this today to be a little introduction into Slavic Native Faith.
Nice.
Which is a relatively broad category.
And it's also not a native faith, of course.
Yeah, right. It shares a lot of, it's a broad category. It has a lot of commonalities, both in origin and content. And I'll also mention some of the more kind of wacky proponents of this idea. I guess this one will be a little bit Ukraine-centered just because it ties into our other topic.
I mean, the topic is not like actual native faith. This is like not an ethnographic episode. It's.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of this before. I think in episode 95 when we talked about the ABG law, Jonine, and Temple of the Black Sun from Russia's book Kiss of Marana, which is published by Temple of Blood's Martinet Press.
Yeah, he had to kiss Marana, this fella, and then became master of knife fight, something like that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
A lot of hiking in that book. I remember that.
I know that I've also in previous episodes randomly mentioned the weirdo Ukrainian RUNVira temple in upstate New York. And I think people have asked about it in comments before because I've just been into that for a while. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about that today.
This is that episode.
We made it. We might as well put it in here. I mean, this is the inter-arc. This is an appropriate place for such things.
Yeah, we've been theming a lot lately on made up prehistories of peoples, so I think it's all good.
Yeah, this you get a lot of that here.
Yeah.
So yeah, as Rey said, despite the name Slavic Native Faith, or called RUNVira, RUNVira, whatever in different Slavic languages, is not particularly ancient or native, or in some cases even Slavic. And like I said, it covers a range of beliefs from kind of traditional neo-paganism to monotheistic nationalist cults to, I don't know how to, like neo-Vedic and quasi-Zoroastrianism. There's a lot of shit here. So, I mean, this can be a continuing series because the more you look into it, you're like, the fuck for like all this shit.
Man,
Man,
have their
anybody?
own take on aliens?
You know, I haven't actually seen that much alien stuff. I'm absolutely sure it's there, but it wasn't in the research that I did for this episode because, like I said, I'm going to focus kind of more on some of the early proponents and some of the guys that would get things started in Ukraine, at least. But that also had influence in Russia.
Neo-Vedic quasi-Zoroastrianism is quite the Twitter tag.
I know, right? So, I mean, like most neo-pagan movements, you can kind of trace the origins back to, you know, the era of Romantic nationalism, when there was a kind of an intellectual interest in folk culture in order to establish and create a unique past for particular ethnic identities. And of course, this is true in the Slavic world. And you can see that in, like, you know, both Pan-Slavism, that was popular in the 19th century and 20th centuries, and of course the emergent national movements of various different Slavic nations. And, you know, we've talked about some of this kind of stuff before, right? And this shouldn't be that, you know, crazy to anybody. But in reality, very little is really known about pre-Christian Slavs. I mean, since they lacked a written record, you know, they didn't have, despite, you know, what they may say later on, some of the neo-pagans say, you know, they didn't have like a written culture. You know, they didn't have runes. They didn't have an alphabet. None of that. Much of what has been reconstructed about ancient Slavic religion kind of stems from rather biased accounts from, you know, whatever, ancient Greek and Roman sources to then, you know, Christian missionaries describing the practices of these kind of barbaric pagan cultures. The archaeological record's also kind of rather limited for a few reasons. It seems that Slavic pagan temples and idols were often made of wood. So the Christians kind of had a pretty easy time erasing the pagan legacy. I mean, there are some things that they found. There's a pretty well-preserved temple in Rügen Island, I think, which is now in Germany. There's, of course, this Bruch idol from Poland, or Galicia, I guess. Contested area there as to
also
claims it now. It's in Poland now, but Ukrainians say, of course, blah, blah, blah.
But for sure, it's an intermarium area.
It's an intermarium area, absolutely. And even some people say that's not real. You know, there are, like, you know, toponyms in Slavic lands that refer to gods that we know of, like, you know, the mountain Triglav in Slovenia. There's a Slavic god by the same name. There's a town, Veles, in Macedonia, which is also the name of a Slavic god. There's that kind of stuff. So people know the names of gods, but a lot of what's reconstructed comes from an analysis of kind of prevalent folk beliefs and practices. So we have some sort of idea of what was important to, like, ancient Slavic people, you know, kind of traditional beliefs about different spirits, kind of malevolent and benevolent spirits that, you know, exist in the woods or in the home, or, you know, things like that, you know, some people believe to this day. And then, you know, certain syncretic practices that got adopted into Christianity too. You know, I think we even talked about this back in episode 95, but, like, you know, practices surrounding, like, Christmas and Easter,
right?
Like, you know, veneration of certain trees like oaks and rites associated with the spring, like Ivan Kupala, which is big in Eastern Slavic peoples, which is kind of a, you know, a spring celebration that was Christianized. And of course, you know, it has been relatively well established that certain saints correspond to certain Slavic gods, and, you know, whatever the veneration of certain saints correspond to those gods and the like. And, you know, that's all fine and dandy. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's the usual, right? Like,
it's good. Yeah, it's interesting research material for, you know, like, ethnologists to study. but it doesn't really offer up a coherent belief system.
Right.
And so it requires a considerable amount of invention, right? And probably one of the most important inventions, and as a result, kind of the single most important text to a lot of native faith practitioners, is a, let's say, 20th century literary forgery known as the Book of Veles. Veles, of course, like I mentioned, the name of that Macedonian town, it's a Slavic god. What we know about Veles kind of also comes from the Book of Veles, so it's not, and some other early ethnographic research, which isn't, you're not really sure whether he was the god of the underworld and associated with streams and snakes and whatever. It's what people seem to believe. But again, it's all kind of muddled as to where that actually comes from. But according to the legend, the book was a series of wooden tablets, I believe, written on birch, in a mysterious script that I can only describe looking like some sort of mashup of runes, Cyrillic, and Sanskrit, and that it has a line running across the top of it. It gives you kind of an idea of where this is coming from, too, right?
Yeah.
And, it describes a history of ancient Slavic peoples, their origins, their movements. It's not super detailed on that part, but it does cover ritual practices and myths about various gods and spirits. And so you can see why people want to believe it's real, right?
Sure.
Now, its origin is kind of interesting, too. So it was reportedly uncovered by a white army officer, a Russian white army officer during, the Russian Revolution, Civil War, who in the 1920s took it into exile to Western Europe, where he linked up with another guy by the name of, who was a Russian-Ukrainian emigre named Yuri Mirolyubov, who managed to decipher and transcribe the whole book before conveniently it got lost in World War II during the occupation of Belgium, where he was. So all we have left are his transcriptions and I think a drawing of one of the tablets that has the original writing on it. Yeah, I mean, it's a complete forgery. Everybody knows this, but don't tell this to a lot of Slavic neo-pagans.
I wouldn't. Not face to face, maybe from a safe distance, on Twitter or something.
So it was only after World War II that Mirolyubov's transcriptions began to circulate in kind of nationalist emigre communities of both Russian and Ukrainian nationalists, who then subsequently kind of argued about certain fine points in the text, especially about kind of the origin, the original Slavic homeland, whether it's in Ukraine or, Russians situated farther north in Russia.
Okay.
Blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So you can see it's all very modern.
Yeah.
I mean, this is basically, we know about it from after World War II. Whether or not it was actually discovered, in the early 20th century, some claim it was discovered even earlier and then given to that white army officer, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't really until the 50s that anybody had actually read it. And it's very crucial that it was developing among the nationalist emigre communities in the diaspora during the Cold War, because that's where this revival of Slavic native faith or neo-paganism or whatever happens. It happens almost exclusively in emigre communities and then comes back into the former Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe in general, in the 80s, around Glasnost and Perestroika and stuff, when it was more easy to circulate those kinds of texts. But there were some important figures who developed some foundational ideas of modern Slavic native faith somewhat earlier. So, if this is happening in the 50s, there were guys that were doing this in the 30s.
Okay.
And the Ukrainian context, but it's also important for the Russian one as well. A guy by the name of Volodymyr Shaian stands out kind of the most. Shaian was a linguist, an Orientalist at Lviv University in the 1930s who specialized in Sanskrit, which I think you know, probably guess where this is going.
Yeah. Some fishy shit is what I'm feeling. You just raised a lot of flags on your way into that sentence there.
Yeah. There was something in the 30s, people liked relating things to Sanskrit, and then something else happened. Shaian supposedly experienced some sort of spiritual awakening in the mid-1930s, which led him to the belief that Ukrainians/Slavs are the true Aryans, as in that is the Aryan homeland.
In the Aryans from Hitler's speeches.
Yes, although crucially, he separates it from National Socialism. He actually presented his findings at an Indology conference in the USSR in 1937. And his idea was that to kind of counter German Aryanism and Aryanist philosophy as being too Germanic-centered.
So it's like an Aryan arms race here.
Well, I mean, what he was advocating for, and this is, repeated over and over in the various people that have written about him, is this kind of quote-unquote pan-Aryan idea, which kind of based on what his disciples would say later, I think kind of means that, all Europeans are Aryans, but it started here, kind of thing. So you don't get to claim this. We do. This is actually where the Aryans originate. And of course, he has a whole bunch of linguistic explanations for this, as did the Germans, kind of. But, typical stuff for, this kind of Aryan ideas in like this time period. Although Shaian wasn't even unique in the former USSR at this time period, there's an interesting figure. He's an Armenian national hero by the name of, and I'm definitely going to mispronounce this, Garegin Najde. It's Nzhde, who developed a pagan philosophy called Tsegakron while in exile in Nazi Germany, which situated the Aryan homeland in Armenia. He's an interesting guy, actually. He was a volunteer on the Bulgarian side in the Balkan Wars, and then was an important figure in like this in the shortly lived Armenian state. Very anti-Turkish guy.
We're
of course
talking about the Balkan Wars in 1912.
Yeah, 1912. Yeah, he eventually,
because there was no Bulgarian side in the Balkan Wars of 1990s.
Yes,
right.
Yes, and this is also, he was long dead by the 1990s. He ended up in Nazi Germany, came up with this whole Armenian Aryan philosophy. Is still very respected in Armenian communities in Armenia itself. He was like a total fucking Nazi and collaborated during the war, and then was arrested and executed in the late 40s.
There's a lot of these like total fucking Nazis who are well respected today.
All over the place.
Different parts of the world.
Shaian, however, managed to escape Lviv in 1944, where he ended up in one of the many displaced persons camps in Germany that we've talked about over and over again. It seemed to be a really bumping time there. Like, you go to these displaced persons camps, they're forming all kinds of organizations, and Shaian is no exception here. It is there that he would meet one of his disciples, who'd later deny this connection, Lev Sylenko. I'm gonna focus on him a little bit later because he's like a proper bizarre Tenepod character.
Great.
But let's wrap up Shaian's life here, though. So, while he was in this displaced persons camp, he established something called the Order of the Sun God, which was
perfectly normal camp club to join. Some people do arts and crafts. Some people start the Order of the Sun God.
Yeah, he started the Order of the Sun God. Well, I mean, he was into this Aryanist philosophy before, and he developed this, Slavic neo-pagan idea, for a while now, and he decided that the Order of the Sun God would be some sort of both political and paramilitary organization that was, I guess, supposed to be a pagan unit of stay-behinds in the Ukrainian insurgent army,
all right,
fighting the Red Army fighting the Soviets after the war. Now, it's kind of disputed as to whether or not that actually was a real thing. There's no indication that like he had, there's only very minor indications that he had some followers in Ukraine that started some sort of neo-pagan guerrilla group. But it's really not there. So it definitely existed in the displaced persons camp as a political organization, but whether or not it was actually attached to the Ukrainian insurgent army and some sort of stay behind unit isn't really clear. I'm guessing probably not, because it didn't seem that he had that big of a following. He definitely had some followers, but it wasn't huge. Either way, he would eventually end up in exile in London, where he lived until 1974. And he wasn't as popular as Sylenko's group to come, but as these people were left these displaced persons camps, some of his followers who ended up in around the world, but particularly in Canada, set up, let's say, Shaianist Slavic Native Faith communities and temples. I think there was one in Hamilton, Ontario, around in Canada. His writings, however, would become very, very influential and very popular in Native Faith circles in Ukraine and Russia after the fall of the USSR. So he didn't actually really get to see how influential his writings would actually be, which, boo-hoo. But that brings us to Lev Sylenko. And I've been fascinated by the RUNVira cult for a long time. Kind of when I randomly discovered that there is a bizarre Ukrainian Aryan temple in the middle of the Borscht Belt in the Catskills in upstate New York.
Right.
I was like trying to imagine these elderly Ukrainian nationalists worshiping Dajbog while being surrounded by like Jewish summer camps and comedy clubs. So when you look at it on Google Maps, there are actually of course, like Jewish summer camps and stuff like that around there. And then there's just like this, the main temple for this Aryan anti-Semitic quasi-Slavic faith temple there, just chilling in Spring Glen, New York.
Man.
And he also just looks like a stereotypical cult leader from the 60s and 70s. Like real weird getup with jewelry, giant glasses, weird haircut.
He's been to space for sure.
He has definitely been to space. Like
he's traveled to the rings of Saturn and back.
Absolutely.
Look at that shit.
You see that dude and you're like, oh, that's a fucking cult leader. For sure.
Yeah. I will be drinking this Kool-Aid later.
And he's like holding his book, and like any picture of him, he just looks fucking wacky.
Yeah.
Even when he gets older, his hair gets all like frizzy and crazy, and he's just yelling about, the connections of certain words, Sanskrit and Ukrainian, and just like very animated guy. He kind of looks like the character Baby Billy from The Righteous Gemstones. I don't know if you guys watched that, but
I feel so guilty about not having watched that yet. Yeah.
I'll have to post a picture,
a
couple pictures of him because it's pretty funny.
That medallion just tops it off. Just nothing's wrong with like an all-white suit with an all-white shiny shirt and a gold-ass medallion.
The gold medallion?
That's the way to go. I want to be buried in this.
I bet you he was buried in that.
Like, I bet you're right.
Fritz, you have to start a cult.
If you do start a cult, I would model myself after his look. You really, the huge glasses really do it too. I don't know.
I think we can make everybody in the cult should look like this, like exactly like this.
Okay.
And was he wearing a turtleneck in that one photo? Like it's
he doesn't need to wear the turtleneck to give the turtleneck vibe off. That's what I'm talking
about. Totally,
it's
definitely a turtleneck vibe. It's definitely a turtleneck vibe. Yeah. So Lev Sylenko was born in 1921 in a village in central Ukraine, which I've tried to look up a few times, has changed names several times since his birth. He refers to it by its old name. I believe it's on the banks of the Dnipro River. Certainly a river that features heavily in his religion. Most of what we know about his early life comes from his own writings in the central texts of the RUNVira religion, of which he is, of course, the main prophet. And even that's kind of scattered. But like one of the more crucial things in his life is that his father was supposedly murdered by the NKVD.
Okay.
Which is totally believable. And of course, that he was always, even as a child, deeply tied to the soil of his native land, which made him hate the Muscovite occupiers and kind of all foreigners.
Sure.
And as a sympathizer, obviously, to Ukrainian nationalist thought, he managed to escape the advance of the Red Army and also ended up in Germany, where, like I said, he met Volodymyr Shaian. And like I said before, he would deny this link later on, even though everybody else says that he was a follower of Shaian until he established RUNVira. But, I think he has a little bit of a, let's say, ego trip, the whole like being a prophet of a religion thing.
No, this
like,
guy? This guy, the guy with the medallion?
There's like 100 pages in his book dedicated to like why you need a strong prophet. It didn't necessarily even really work out for him very well. But yeah, he has a little bit of that going on. So, after he leaves the displaced persons camp, he ends up first moving to Canada, where, again, he connects with some of the other Slavic Native Faith people that were there, before ending up and settling in the United States in the 1960s. Now, kind of following in Cheyenne footsteps, Sylenko also became an advocate of the Aryan origins of Ukrainian people, but also kind of took it a step further, which we'll see here in a second. Predictably, he also studied Sanskrit and Hinduism, and, of course, attempted to prove the link between Ukrainians and Aryans linguistically through relations to Sanskrit.
Does it have, can I just guess, does it have something to do with Aryan meaning, I don't know, noble?
I think there is a bit of nobility there.
Seems to be common in this story.
Less than you might imagine.
Oh, yeah?
This kind of reminds me more of some of the weird white power cults that we talk about, where it's like, we're the origins of everything.
Okay. Hip-hop, etc.
I'm not really sure, I've read a lot of material about him and RUNVira and some of these other like neo-pagan groups. It's kind of not clear to me what he actually did for a living before he started the religion, because reportedly he also, like, as all of these people say, traveled extensively around, like, Asia and, whatever, in Europe, and learned all these things through his travels.
Yeah, the great master story.
He doesn't seem like he was some sort of independently wealthy guy, though, so it may not even be real. Who knows? Now, the religion, he founded his new religion, RUNVira, in Chicago in 1966, and the name is actually...
No good religion was ever started in Chicago. That's not... it's not a place to start a religion.
1966, that's also Church of Satan, right? Anton LaVey, I think that was 66 as well. A lot of, like, good cults were happening then.
Yeah.
The 60s were a good time for that. This is definitely a cult. And so the name is an acronym. It is, like, absolutely. It's an acronym that means Native Ukrainian National Faith, or Ridna Ukrainska Nacionalna Vira.
Okay.
I said that correctly. That's the RUN part. And Vira means faith. So it's often written with, like, RUN capital and then VIRA lowercase.
I mean, again, we mentioned this so many times, but it's so, these people are so stupid, or I don't know what they are, but like to claim that a nation, which is like a 19th century concept, like in general, not like a particular nation, but nations as such are a very new concept, and then to claim that they have some like ancient origins, like it's so, they all do it all the time, but it's so dumb.
Well, I guess if it worked for, other assholes, why not guess it could work for you,
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, it's like if you claim like ancient origins for like the I don't know. Well, I guess they do. I want to say like for the Democratic Party, but I guess they do that as well in some sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just rooted in like ancient Greek traditions of democracy or whatever.
Yeah, not fucking slave culture in the South, or
it's
yeah.
Yeah, I mean everybody wants to have this like glorious origin story.
Yeah.
So it was founded in Chicago, and it would eventually be headquartered in this large temple in Spring Glen, New York, called the Temple of Mother Ukraine or Oriana, and we'll get to the meaning of that name in a second. Okay. If we have any listeners that want to go there and take pictures, that'd be fucking sweet. I don't know if they let people in there. It's still there. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, though. I've just always been super curious about this. It's so bizarre to me.
Extra points if you break off a piece of it and send it to us.
Maybe don't do that.
Iconoclasm.
Yeah. I mean, this is a well-known satirical podcast.
Yes.
We're joking.
Yes. We're joking.
Very
we joke
joking.
A lot. We are frat boy humor.
Yes.
It's David Myatt.
I'm just japing around.
Just japing around.
Yep.
So the religion itself is some sort of attempt to make Ukrainian nationalism into a religion.
Uh-huh.
The symbols in the temple and the ones used in the rituals are all Ukrainian national symbols, like the colors of the flag, both the modern blue and yellow flag, but also the black and red flag of like the UNO and the Banderists, along with the symbol of the trident inside of a sun, to which he gives particular religious significance. The rituals involve, from what I've seen, also like water and soil from like, the Ukrainian rivers and land. And like it's worshiping Ukraine.
Yeah.
Basically. And the glorious ancestors of the Ukrainian people.
So it's like what like the Mall of America is to Americans.
Yes, it is.
All right. Yeah, I get it
except
now.
without a big roller coaster in the middle of the temple.
But does it have a Cinnabon?
I'm sure there's a Cinnabon nearby in Spring Glen, New York.
Well,
I'm sure it's 20-minute drive to the closest Cinnabon. So I think that counts.
Well, then carry on.
So unlike Shaian's attempt to recreate a polytheistic Slavic pantheon, Sylenko's RUNVira is interesting because it's actually a monotheistic cult centered around the Slavic sun god Dajbog.
Oh, okay. I got a picture I can't wait for you to explain to me. I'm sure you're going to get to it. The fucking cosmic egg thing.
Oh, God. I don't know if I can fully explain that to you.
Can I just describe it to the listener?
Yes. Yeah.
So basically, you get yourself an egg, and in the middle of that egg, where the yolk should be, you put a yin-yang looking thing in Ukrainian colors, and then you just cover it in swastikas, and you've got some kind of, I guess, a worldview?
Yeah, you found that on the Wikipedia, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, they do have some sort of explanation for that. I mean, it's some ridiculous.
Well, here's what
stuff.
I see. I think what it's saying is like outside the egg, you've got swastikas, but then the egg itself is made of swastikas. But within the egg, there's a sort of a part of the egg that is torn in two, two oppositional pieces inside, both of which are also swastika. That would be
there is kind of this
religious explanation.
Yeah, I mean, there is kind of a yin-yang thing in Slavic Native Faith, but it kind of comes from the Book of Veles in the this concept of Yav Prav Nav, which is some sort of breakdown of the spiritual realms, like the realm of the earth, the realm of the ancestors, and I don't know,
and they're all
gods or something, and they're all competing in some sort of whatever balance universe, blah blah blah. Some even say that that's why they also venerate the trident, because the trident also represents those three things that come from the Book of Veles. That concept, the Yav Prav Nav, is kind of universal in almost all of these like Slavic Native Faith groups that I've seen. Although I think a little bit maybe less so in RUNVira, because again, it's kind of this. It's a monotheist cult, kind of,
right? Yeah.
And so like what he does to explain this is
By
not...
the way, it's monotheistic, but they believe that there are many gods, but they just decided to worship one of them?
So it's interesting. So he doesn't deny that like ancient Slavs maybe worshipped multiple gods, but maybe that was all a representation of one god, which is Dajbog, who's the sun, the giver of life. I mean, there's a lot of this kind of stuff in like, pantheism too. I mean, a lot of people know more about this than me, but like you do worship one god that is manifested in multiple different ways. But for him, he takes it into kind of an egotistical direction, not surprisingly, and sees himself as this prophet who is undertaking a major religious reformation, which would bring about a new era. So he likens himself in this sense to Buddha and like Buddhist development on kind of arising out of Hinduism, or for example, Muhammad as well. That's how he sees himself, as this figure that is like transforming the religion into something kind of new and powerful. And in order to do that, and he writes about this in this book that we'll get into in a second, he sees himself as like as the bringer of a new era, basically. So it is a native faith, but it's also new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they say dress for the job you want, and I gotta say he did it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is like pure cult stuff. And as a result, like there are lots of Slavic neo-pagans who reject him, and this like cult of Dajbog specifically, because, they're like, no, we're not monotheists, we're polytheists. We're pagans.
Yeah, that's kind of the point, I would say.
Yeah, but that's why, of course, like the symbol of the religion is this sun with a Ukrainian trident in the middle. So it's Dajbog and Ukraine. And then, of course, the whole weird Trinity symbolism of the trident and all the various meanings you can derive from that. But Sylenko situates the origin point of Ukrainians to the Neolithic Tripilian culture, 11,000 years ago, which he calls Oriana, which is his term for Aryan.
Okay, that's the yellow part of the egg yolk that I'm looking at here.
Yeah.
All right.
And so Oriana is like the Aryan homeland, and I don't know why you couldn't just call it Aryans. I guess I do know the reason, actually. He relates the term Aryan, Oriana, to a Ukrainian word or Slavic word for plowing, which, represents them as like a agricultural people.
Yeah, nobility plowed all the time.
Yeah.
Big plowers.
Yeah.
Peasants, nobility, like it's all the same.
Right. That's nationalism right there.
Yeah. So this is why, according to the RUNVira calendar of Dajbog, we live in the year 11,000, whatever the fuck. Now, the people of Oriana are Oryans or Aryans, and they are the ones, of course, who developed Vedic culture, which they brought to the Indian subcontinent while also building Sumeria, apparently, and somehow also Zoroaster is Ukrainian, kind of.
Nice.
And an Aryan. They, of course, developed a writing system 11,000 years ago, and it's the first and greatest writing system. And, I don't know, man.
No, I think we got it. We've been very familiar territory before, so I think we know the map.
Crucially, in kind of proper racist form, he specifically describes Oriana as the origin of the white race, and he uses the term white race and white civilization.
Going for it.
I think this is interesting. I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that he lived in North America, that like attachment to whiteness specifically.
Yeah.
I'm speculating because, we don't know. I mean, he came, I guess, to the Americas at a relatively young age. And so, I mean, I kind of feel like that might have influenced this a little bit, because you don't really get that kind of specific reference to whiteness as much.
Sure.
You get they describe what Aryans look like, but he says the white race and white civilization. So the main text, there are many texts, and he was quite prolific. He wrote a lot. The main text of RUNVira is this insanely long book called the Mahavira, or Great Faith, borrowing the term Maha, of course, from Sanskrit, which I refuse to believe that anybody has actually read cover to cover.
One could hope. Yeah,
I tried to read it. It's very hard. It's well over 1,000 pages. I think it's like almost 1,500 or so pages. It's extremely long.
So can we announce, friends? Can we announce now a new mini arc of you reading that?
Fuck no,
The 9 installments.
no.
I mean,
and I curse you in the name of the neo-Shaianist god Veles for even suggesting it.
it would be an entire arc.
Okay.
It's extremely dense, extremely long. And like I said, I read through parts of it. Like I just had to skip certain shit because it was just
Bonkers.
it's bonkers. Yeah, it's insane and just too long. And
I picture the English having a line running through it, just like in the made-up script.
No, he uses Cyrillic. It's okay. He didn't decide to use the Veles script, although he might not have known about it because I think he's probably started writing this around the time that the Book of Veles started to circulate. So this is his own text. Okay.
All right.
And it begins kind of with his life story and philosophy. Like I said, this is where we get some of this stuff about like his, father being killed by the communists, but also like a lot of talk about like how his growing up, he saw that his grandfathers kind of respected the old gods and never really respected the church and never were like proper Christians, and that they visited like the graves of their ancestors. And this kind of awakened in him as a child, even this connection to like the earth and his ancestors. And also, again, his disdain for Christianity as being a foreign religion. And he dedicates quite a bit of the book to this, right? Explaining why kind of Christianity is alien to the Ukrainian people, because it wants Ukrainians to identify with peoples and places which are foreign to them instead of venerating, their own holy land and ancestors.
I mean, it's not actually hard to explain how Christianity is not Ukrainian. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, but he thinks it's bad that like,
yeah, of course,
that, somebody should have to, like, for example, he talks about like not being able to relate to like the people on the icons because they look Greek to him. I guess they're not blonde enough or whatever. He is, I guess, not a proponent of the white Jesus thing, the blonde Jesus that Protestants have. He looked at a lot of, Orthodox icons with, dark-haired Jesus and was like, hell no. But also because it's Jewish. And
right.
Of course.
There's a good smattering of anti-Semitism in there. It's a lot of this kind of thing that Jews know that Christianity is merely a sect of Judaism that forces, everybody else to bow to their rabbi. Actually, here's a little quote from there. Christianity is most useful to the Jews because it magnified their national religion, Judaism, popularized it among the peoples of the white race, and put the Jews in the position of, quote, God's chosen people, and subordinated all Christians to the spirit of the Jewish mentality. Christianity created a sense of superiority in the Jews.
Man, somebody should have told the Vatican that before the 40s happened.
Somebody should have told the Jews that in Ukraine that were getting pogromed constantly by Christians.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
I wonder what is the Jewish mentality.
I mean, he talks about it a lot. He has this, it is kind of this, they are kind of controlling things because Christianity is ultimately Jewish, but also this, that weird reverence that anti-Semites have for Jews in that, like, they're doing it so much better than we are. And then he says that, like, the interesting thing about the Jews is that they, they're nomadic, like, they were forced from their homeland and they lost their language, but then they developed new languages, which he cites Yiddish, to communicate amongst themselves and retain their culture. And he admires that. And I think it goes so far as to, like, he says in his writings at certain times, he doesn't have a problem with, like, Jews being Jews, but, like, it makes sense for them to worship in their lands their God, and that, like, other people shouldn't have to worship their God or the God that's derived from their God. Christianity.
I don't think anybody really has to worship it anymore, though, is the thing.
Well, I mean, he would disagree.
Yeah.
And like I said, this is also the problem is that it's Jewish, and that's also Greek, right? That it also comes from Greek culture and civilization.
Are Greek Aryans, according to him?
Doesn't sound like
it. Actually, it doesn't sound like it. Or that they're like so Christ cucked that they can't, like, they don't have a culture anymore, or whatever, which is kind of how he sees Muscovites, aka Russians, which is that they also, like, because they're diluted culture, adopted, like, the Greek religion and then used it as a tool of oppression in their empire. That kind of thing.
I mean, Ukrainians adopted Orthodox Christianity before Moscow did, no?
Yeah, but that was like a kind of a great tragedy. And he also, he doesn't even have, like, necessarily, and a lot of Slavic neo-pagans, they hate Volodymyr, the empire who, the emperor who converted Kievan Rus to Christianity. I think they tend to say that the last good one was, what was his name? It's never mind. No, they tend to believe his predecessors were better, but also because, like, even though the Slavs eventually conquered the Khazars, they were paying tribute to them at some point, which meant that they were also kind of supporting the Jews or whatever. It depends on kind of which native faith person you ask as to where they want to trace their, like, where the last good guys were. But yeah, I mean, they succumb to, like, outside influence, and that's, like, the kind of downfall of Ukraine. And
because of course like, you had to have the good guys, and then the bad guys came. Like, that's has to be the vision of history. Of course.
And here there are a lot of bad guys. Because not only Orthodoxy is bad, the Roman Catholic Church is bad. He talks about that too. There are actually a lot of Catholics and Eastern Catholics in Ukraine as well, so I guess he had to address that issue. But the RUNVira is this slog through, like, 11,000 years of history that, like I said, is insane and difficult to read. But it's also like a modern political text because it makes constant references to, like, injustices in modern history and, very modern concepts such as, like, something that comes up is national demoralization. I mean, in general, the nation, right, as we know it, is not an ancient concept. Although, I mean, he is trying to situate it in this kind of continuous history from, the Neolithic to now, and that, like, they were, I think,
of course,
had a concept of the nation before and then lost it, is my understanding of this. Again, it's incredibly hard to read and long. And it's kind of not, I guess, logically inconsistent for him, because he sees this revival of native faith, this task that he's doing, as essential to the consolidation of a modern nationalist identity, one that's, free from all foreign rule. And foreign rule, like, again, it's like, independence doesn't stop at political independence. You need total independence, like religious independence from, these foreign concepts. Christianity probably thinks that maybe the, like, Jews that live in Ukraine shouldn't live there anymore. I'd imagine something like that. And again, this is, like, why Ukrainians can be a true nation once they worship the land in which they live. This is it. You have to worship the land. You have to worship your people and your ancestors. And this kind of begs the question to me, and I'm not sure he ever answers it in there. Why then did the ancient Aryans migrate to spread their philosophy? It seems kind of inconsistent, no? Like,
yeah, it does.
Specifically because, like, and if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about, like, the relation to some of this, to some strands of Russian neo-paganism. But, like, in general, a lot of Ukrainian, like, native faith is supposed to be tied to the land specifically. And that's like, this anti-imperial vision that like, we've been here forever and we're going to stay here forever. And we don't want something that's not ours. This is our land or whatever. Why then did the ancient Orions, make the Sumerians exist or whatever?
Yeah.
Why did they go to like the Indus Valley? Why, why?
I guess
is any of
Evola would say that Aryans are actually Hyperborean and they have this naturally, kind of explorer warrior spirit in them that came
right,
with
and
the fact that
yeah, and some like Russian neo-pagans are really into that idea, and they are into Hyperborea, and they are into Evola, and he doesn't seem to be so much into Evola or Gnon and traditionalists, but definitely Spenglerian. There's definitely Spengler in there. I mean, he does outline like the idea of nations as kind of living organisms.
Sure. That can fall, that can die, I guess.
Yeah. And that's kind of
foreign infection.
Right. And so that is kind of crucial to his thought. And I think he's absolutely influenced by Spengler there. And some other scholars think that as well. It's really like when we started this podcast, I didn't think we'd be talking about Spengler so much, but he really is absolutely everywhere.
Everywhere.
It's fucking crazy. But then also in the Machavir, like I said, he talks about like a lot of like modern day stuff, including like answering questions and like shit talking people that like in Ukrainian emigre communities that wrote bad things about him.
Okay.
So like, there's like chapters and chapters where he's just like responding to articles published in like different like Ukrainian emigre journals and stuff about him and how he's like a heretic and stuff. And but there's a big part of the book's just that.
Sure. That also sounds really familiar for our
group. Right. It is this like insane like egotism. And then again, like I said, there's a whole chapter dedicated as to why you have to have like a strong prophet and a strong leader and all that kind of stuff. Somewhat surprisingly, this religion did have quite a few followers in the diaspora for how like kind of kooky it is.
Yeah.
It did have like chapters in quite a few different places in the US, in Canada, Australia, places with like significant numbers of Ukrainian emigres. I mean, the main temple, the like Oriana temple in Spring Glen's like pretty big. I think there was one in New Jersey too. There's guys all over the place. And, people would drive like from hours and hours to go to services at their temple. Even though like, I guess you're not really required to, I think, spend so much time in the temple. It has this kind of philosophy that like each individual follower eventually becomes a Rune tato and a Rune mama.
Oh, all right. That's cute.
Yeah. So like, like Rune father and Rune mother, although some people have said that it was mostly men.
So just a bunch of Rune daddies walking around.
Yeah, and the Rune daddies are the ones that like, you do the rituals at home and that kind of stuff. And like I said, the ritual stuff is largely based on like, how national symbols and creating these altars. Interestingly, like I said, it's a religion that worships the nation and like the people. And so like some figures that they like venerate are like poets like Taras Shevchenko, Lesa Ukrainka and the like. And they draw like specific texts where they, say that like, it represents the spirit of the nation and maybe against Christianity or something like that. So they worship people that were alive recently, or in some cases alive currently, like, Sylenko himself. Because I think that, people would have like pictures of him on their little flag altars. And then you needed like some symbol of the sun with the trident. And, you could set up your own little thing at home. And people did that. But it didn't really grow into something more significant until his texts began to circulate along with Cheyenne's texts in the USSR in the 1980s. So by the time Ukraine gets independence, he goes over there, met people that were already into his work, and actually registered the first Native Faith organization in Ukraine. So that's kind of one of the reasons why RUNVira is considered to be pretty significant in that movement as well. is even though like it differs from some of the like neo-pagan groups and the like, it was the first one that like legally registered in the country and was kind of the first of many, but like they kind of broke that ground immediately. And then, quickly developed a lot of followers and temples and the like. I think there's actually a temple at the site of his birthplace now.
Oh wow!
In that village in central Ukraine, it's not an insignificant movement at all. Like they're out there. But RUNVira is like interesting because like it starts in fucking America and it's just bizarre.
All of our best European horror shit starts in some expat community somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. They're complete freaks.
Do these guys have hymns?
Yes. I mean, yeah, they sing like folk songs, folk music. I don't know. I've seen like videos of their congregations and meetings, and it's nice, like folk singing, that kind of thing.
Well, this is a big deal for American Catholics right now. How do they feel about guitars on not the stage, but church stage? What do you call that?
Oh, well, they have like those Ukrainian instruments that I forget what they're called, the stringed ones, and all kinds of stuff.
Various lutes.
Yeah, and like this weird horn thing. I don't know. Ukrainian music's pretty good. Traditional music. It's pretty fun.
They've done well in Eurovision.
There's all kinds of weird shit that comes out of this like native faith shit though. There's like there's a Ukrainian like martial arts that I think also comes out of like a RUNVira split off. They're like Cossack martial arts.
Master of Knife.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that like it's a real martial art that like Ukrainians can relate to because it's from there. And like dude was like, yeah, I studied karate, but I could never reach the higher levels because it's like Japanese philosophy and stuff, and that's like alien to me.
And I don't like stretching.
No, these dudes are stretch a bit. I've seen it. It's pretty like, I don't know, acrobatic. But despite like kind of spreading, or maybe because it spread, RUNVira wasn't immune to division. So like already by the 90s, there was a split within the movement and a new group emerged calling itself Osid RUNVira. Not to be confused with another one that's Osidu RUNVira. But
okay.
Osid RUNVira managed to wrest control of the Spring Glen Temple, I think through legal means in the US in the 90s. But they didn't reject Sylenko as the prophet, but it seemed that they got kind of tired of taking all their orders from him. Is my understanding of what happened there. Like, okay, you're still the prophet and you're still the holy text. We'll keep your picture up in the temple and stuff, but like, you don't have the final word on anything. I think he was kind of nuts. And it does continue to exist to this day in both abroad and in Ukraine, even though he died in 2008.
Oh, okay.
So, like I said before, despite not being the biggest native faith group anymore, Shaian and Sylenko's work were really essential in helping to revive whatever you want to call it, Slavic religion in the former USSR. And this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. And I talked about Shaian and Sylenko because they are weird, but also important figures in the movement in both Ukraine and in Russia, and of course other Slavic countries. But I mean, native faith is like a very big thing, like in Russia and Ukraine, more so than in other Slavic countries. Like it exists in Czech Republic. I think there's a pretty big one, even in Poland. But like the real like mass movement of RUNVira is in like Russia and Ukraine. And now like some of these faith groups are more or less kind of nationalistic. They're all nationalistic to a certain degree. And that's what kind of, in some texts I've read, kind of separates RUNVira from some other like neo-pagan movements in the West, is that this is like explicitly, created basically by nationalist emigres for like a very specific purpose. But of course, like some are more like, so especially like the actual like neo-pagan ones are more pan-Slavist. And so like they, all meet together, different Slavic groups, Russians and Ukrainians and, whatever, Czechs and Slovaks and whatnot. But like this often does kind of teeter on the Russian side into Russian chauvinism, in that like they kind of refuse to acknowledge Ukrainians as separate from Russians, which irritates Ukrainians for obvious reasons. I've read some accounts of like things that have happened at some of their like meetups where like the Ukrainians would be like, guys, you have to, we're going to school you on some stuff about us and, stop like referring to us as little brother or whatever. On the other side, in Russian Native Faith, there is kind of a direct counterpart. It's often compared to RUNVira and Sylenkoism in the form of this kind of Vedist Slavic Native Faith movement called Kandibaism, which is also an attempt to have some sort of monotheist native faith, which is founded by this absolute weirdo, Viktor Kandiba in St. Petersburg. I think in the 90s is when it began. But that's like almost, seeing as where we're at now, like that's definitely a different episode. And I would like to like revisit this stuff. But it's interesting. And like Kandibaism is less tied to like the land of or Yana, like RUNVira is, and is instead seems to kind of find a way of like rationalizing Russian expansionism through a more Hyperborean approach. And drawing more heavily and directly on Ginon and Evola. And that is like, Russians are dispersed from their original Hyperborean homelands and thus have spread and should spread and that kind of thing. And that like kind of also ties into like some of the things we've seen with Native Faith and how that's playing out in the current war, right? Because you have like Native Faith people on both sides, but there are very different schools of it, right? And there are these ones in Russia that are extremely like expansionist and imperialistic, right? And they don't want to give up like Siberia, like because that belongs to Russian, right? To Russians, they're kind of given right, and Ukrainians are Russians too. They're just whatever, corrupted and don't understand this.
Westernized, maybe.
Yeah. There are a lot of different explanations. There's a lot of like these kind of chauvinist, Russian chauvinist Native Faith groups. And I think we just don't have time to talk about them now, but like we should definitely get back to that relatively soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Because again, I did just like kind of talk about these two guys because Sylenko is like just a fucking...
They're so colorful. They're
interesting character to me.
Yes.
And of course, like since it was founded in the U.S., there's like stuff you can read about him in English as well, and like diaspora writers have written about it. Whereas like some of the other stuff is more like Russian language heavy or Ukrainian language heavy, which would takes me a little bit more time.
Sure.
But the growth of this Native Faith stuff is an interesting phenomenon. It's not like a coincidence that it happened in like post-socialist countries. There's scholars such as the Russian historian and ethnologist Viktor Schnirelman, who's written pretty extensively on Slavic neopaganism, specifically Russian neopaganism, and it's often about its ties to anti-Semitism. And I recommend any of his stuff to read about the subject because it's quite thorough and there's a lot of it. He goes into a lot of this roots of like, Russian anti-Semitism in general, and then how it plays out in these like Native Faith and neo-pagan groups. But also interestingly, like it wasn't just limited to Slavic people too. Schnirelman had identified a bunch of different movements that emerged in Russia in the 90s of different, even like smaller ethnic groups, like within like Ossetian culture, Ossetians, Chuvash, Armenians, kind of each with this prehistoric origin story and kind of utilizing pseudo-archaeology and archaeology for kind of these nationalist purposes, as well as like Turkic communities in the form of like the pre-Christian Tengrism, and that kind of thing. So it's definitely not limited to just Slavic, native faith. A lot of that started to happen in the Soviet Union, or in the former Soviet Union in the 90s. And there are some maybe reasons for that can be traced to like some of the promotion of folk culture, especially in the later Soviet period. The prevalence of stuff like astrology, which was very popular in socialist countries too, kind of opened the doors to some of this for people to be interested in this stuff when the texts started to circulate, But, kind of going back to what you said, Ray, in the beginning, it is weird how many of these groups we've talked about, how like in almost all cases, there's this kind of need to establish legitimacy within this like hierarchy of what's considered to be a marker of like a great nation or culture.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's always like having a powerful empire before anybody else, having the oldest writing system, having the strongest and oldest concrete, the biggest pyramid, like, and then of course, like, if you share a culture or religion with another group, or especially a rival, then, it doesn't make you unique or special anymore. And that's why like all these groups, they push the line further and further back as to what is, this kind of glorious past. Because like for Russian, like neo-pagans, like how are you going to make yourself a victim and like rationalize, this nationalist belief system if, you were the dominant hegemon in like the Russian Empire, and then, in the USSR, like you were the dominant culture and language or whatever. Well, then it's because, we never should have accepted Christianity. It was controlled by the Jews and this, that, and the other thing. And so like, let's push this as far back as possible, 11,000, 5,000 years, 11,000 years, whatever. What Neolithic culture can we find in the place where we are and say that that's us? You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're in Dracon Covenant territory there.
Yeah.
They probably rode those little Hebridean ponies around.
Yeah.
Deep cut for the true fans there.
That is deep cut for the true fans. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, how do you guys feel about all that?
Well, I don't like it. I don't like it as a thing. Wish it wasn't, but it is.
I mean, I think we talked a little bit about this when we talked about when we were comparing how this occult stuff, especially like Order of Nine Angle stuff, has similarities with like nation building processes in the 19th century.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all, inventing tradition and inventing continuity, and retroactively start saying that your national project has some ancient roots. And like occult groups have similarities to that, cults as well, in the way they frame their own history. So I guess these people are both. They're like occult or a cult who are also fascists and nationalists. So I mean, yeah, they're just doing that thing that we saw already being done. Yeah,
like unfortunately, if you scratch a RUNVira, you're most likely to find like a nationalist or at least anti-Semite or something.
Yeah.
Kind of even in the less extreme versions of that.
I mean, of course, if you tie it to a national identity, then I mean,
it has to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it has to be. Okay, so people were pagans before they were Christians, but I mean, it wasn't a national religion for them because they didn't have a fucking nation. So it couldn't be framed in such a way. I mean, it was more about, a relationship with your surroundings and nature, and it's probably very animistic. Certainly wasn't monotheistic. I mean, it's pretty stupid.
And I've never really understood the need to check off all those like boxes in that like hierarchy of like what makes someone great. Like, don't you think it's better that like, ancient Slavs are probably just like chilling,
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
living in like these like farming communities and, you know, drinking mead and, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, dancing around in the springtime or whatever. Isn't that
Yes.
like better than like we invented, you know, writing in
Right.
11,000 years ago and then
No.
conquered the world with our culture? Like, why the fuck do you need that? Like, I've never really seen the need to do that, but like, evidently in, you know, this kind of nationalist myth making, it's essential, right? Because otherwise, you know, you're weak or something. You're an inferior
I think a lot of these
culture.
people are not able to like think of a world without a national identity. I don't think they believe that there was such a thing.
No.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because they assume that we all think that way all the time, and that we're all going to be totally happy when we're expelled from our homes and sent somewhere that they think we are supposed to be.
They think that Slavs, you know, like 1,000 years ago, were like, oh, we are Slavs, and there are other Slavs, you know, hundreds of kilometers from us, and they are our brothers.
Yeah.
We are, which is like not how it was.
Yeah. I think the first king of the Slavs was a guy. It's the first person that's received this title somehow in history, even though I think it was mostly informal. Was that guy Samo? But he was, I believe, he was what you would call today a German. They did not care about that back in the day.
Yeah.
They liked him because he brought weapons.
Yeah. No, I don't know. There might be some people who know more about. You know what? No, fuck that. I'm gonna say
Nobody knows more about this than us.
I've been into like this, like reading about like native faith, Slavic paganism and shit for a very long time.
That's
like
true.
I have yet to see like some version of it that's like not completely insane.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. You know what I mean? And I know we have like pagan listeners and stuff, people that are into that kind of stuff, but like, really, when you look at this, like it comes from the fucking 60s or the 30s, and none of it's particularly compelling to me.
No, it's not.
But you know, if you wanna like, you know, read black metal lyrics from Russia or Ukraine or Belarus and understand why they're talking about the, you know, the acts of Perun, which I think is actually a Russian black metal band, I think.
Nice.
Or Ukrainian
That's a
one.
great name for one.
The acts of Perun.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, then, you know, you got to read about this stuff because they like this shit a whole lot.
Right.
And I mean, to the extent that, like, you know, they wield some influence, like more influence than they do in like other countries, like in Russia and Ukraine especially. Like people have like established their temples. They've been around. Like there's like pagan statues in like major cities. It's not like a, you know, really like minor phenomenon there. It's a significant portion of the population. Of course, people don't really, the numbers are kind of questionable because some of these congregations and temples tend to like overblow their numbers, but like it's present everywhere. I mean, if you read like, you know, a demographic breakdown of like, you know, cities in Russia, you'll see like in random places, like a percentage of people who are identify as like native faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's depressing.
It is depressing. But
I mean, it's
maybe
depressing that people are such nationalists and fascists. And, you know, I mean, just this way of thinking totally shaped by nationalism, like such a modern way of thinking about things. Like, so they think, okay, so we have the Orthodox Church, and that's actually a Jewish religion, but before that we had a pagan church.
Right.
And we were and we were Ukrainians, and we had a pagan church. Like,
none of these fucking popes they have over there in the Vatican. We had a pagan pope we called the Rune Daddy.
Well, every house had their Rune Daddy or Rune Mama.
That's right. Yeah. Every house does have a Rune Daddy and Rune Mama. Because Veles didn't create Adam and Steve.
Yeah. Oh, you know, one of the funny things is that, like, in RUNVira, for example, you have to change your name if you have a non-Slavic name. Like, if you have a biblical name, you have to change it.
Nice.
When you adopt the faith, because, like, you know, Slavs do have traditional Slavic names. Volodymyr being one of them, right? Vladimir, and all those kinds of names. So, like, if you're named like Ivan or something, you have to change your name to, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
Slavomir or something.
Yeah. Does it have to relate, do you think? Or can I pick literally any Slavic name?
Well, you pick one that's significant to you because they have meanings. Most of them.
This Ukrainian friend of mine once told me about a guy named Tractor that...
Oh. No, that's communist bullshit.
Well, then I don't want it.
You know who invented communism?
Oh, Jesus?
Well, similar ethnic group.
In a roundabout way. I see.
Yeah.
The Magians.
It's all connected, man. All right. Well, yeah, that's it for this today. I hope you got a little intro there. And, RUNVira is always fun to talk about. But I really do want to get back to eventually Cannibaism and some of this other crazy bullshit from Russia. And maybe black metal coming up soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Great. I'd love to have a music episode, especially a black metal one, if we can figure it out. Well, good. And I guess, I don't know, somehow still thematic. On the Patreon we've got coming, I guess I'll be answering the question, are UFOs actually ancient Irish fairy gentry?
Oh, okay.
So it's, there's some connections there.
All right.
What about my question? Are they Hyperboreans? Will that be answered?
You know what? I'll do a Control F on the old PDF there, and I'll get you an answer before we record it tomorrow.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right, guys. See you soon.
Boys later.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.